Welcome to Neocon 2023 CEU session, Leading Through Change, Lessons from CBRE, GoDaddy, and Google's transformation strategies for the post-pandemic workplace. Presenting is Rex Miller.
How's your day going? Okay, I was asking that guy, but you guys too. There's a lot of material on leading through change, but we're in a historic moment. So what I'd like to do is set a little bit of context for just the kind of change we're going through. I don't think we realize yet the extent of the changes we're going through. I don't think our industry yet has begun to deal with the deeper issues that are going on in the workplace and with people in general. And so my job today is to provoke you to think beyond our world and what we're used to. We all come into this place with our experiences. But when you come to the end of what's working without a bridge to the other side, then you've got to throw away all of the things that we've known because they don't work anymore. But a lot of what we're trying to do is just reconfigure what we think in new ways and hope that it works. How many are doing more hospitality furniture? All right. Hospitality furniture without a hospitality experience is just furniture. And that's my challenge with walking into really nice areas, and I'm wondering, where's the one-off experience? How many are familiar with one-off hospitality? They're one of the restaurant chains here. They've got Publicans, PQM, Avec, one of the top. How many are familiar with the book Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara? 11, Matt, I've given it to several of my clients. I happen to have a niece in this market who is in that high-end restaurant world. And I've got to see it from the backside of the picture. Now, I'm way off my presentation already, which is norm for me. But I think this is an important point to understand. One of the things people in foresight do is they look for weak signals or things that are in completely different areas and look for the lessons. How many have ever been in a really great restaurant where they just surprised you? They came up and they somehow knew about what your interest was. I have a good friend who was the former senior vice president at Brinker and is on the board of several restaurants. Her name's Scarlett Johnson. It's her real name. And Scarlett said that hospitality is the last industry where you don't need a college degree to be very successful because it's all based on emotional intelligence. And what emotional intelligence does is it reads what's going on and then it inquires. Again, that goes back to furniture without the experience, it's just furniture. And we're all wanting to create hospitality environments, but we're not talking about how do we curate the experience. So a lot of my presentation is going to get into the human side of this. A little bit of my background, I've been doing this since 1978. Most of you weren't born. I started in construction project management at a small company called Southwestern Bell. It's now AT&T. And then I've been in the contract side of the furniture business for a long time. And then during the 2000s, after the dot-com crash, it was desperate time for me, so I reinvented and got back into the construction side. And then I got so pissed off with the way construction works, all the adversarial things, that I talked a manufacturer into leading a research group into figuring out how do we improve construction. And it happened to be at the very beginning of a movement in construction called Integrated Project Delivery, IPD. Is anyone familiar with it? Okay. The book I wrote was the catalyst for that movement. And it also won the Cornett Global Innovator of the Year Award in 2008. I put that strategic foresight hat on, then we tackled workplace disengagement. How many know what the engagement numbers are in the workplace? Then how do we design for the workplace if we don't even know what's going on? Before the pandemic, 70% of people would rather be any place else than work. 50% were going through the motion, 20% were working against you. In fact, the research was you're better off paying 20% not to come in because of the negative effect, and 30% were pulling all the weight. Now, it's 30% in the back of the boat drilling a hole. These are the problems that we're here to solve. And we've got to understand the root of those problems. Now, the root is not essentially furniture, but they're design issues. These are all design problems, right? They're all design problems. If we think design is a way of solving problems, that's what they are. I've got a company that specializes in coaching on strengths, like the Clifton Strengths. It's called the Genius Spark, and it's based on research that all of us were geniuses up until we were 5 years old. That's NASA research. And then the problem is we all went to school. And by the time we graduated from school, only 12% of people maintain that genius capacity of creativity and curiosity. And then it gets better. By 30, only 2% have it. So our mission is to help people recapture that. And then during the pandemic, how many did anything radical during the pandemic? Moved to an exotic place like Fargo, North Dakota, or any? You did something radical, what'd you do? Wow, I didn't know that was a thing. Okay, that's a weak signal, Ryan. Mark that as a weak signal. We bought a ranch. No business buying a ranch. But it's an hour south of Fort Worth, and now it's a leadership center. It's got 7 buildings on it that we've completely restored. It's a historic ranch. The house is built out of petrified wood and fossil. That's the house we live in. And we bring people there to get them off the grid for a while and to reconnect. Mindshift is the strategic foresight part of my business. I've got 5 books related to the industry. And then rexmiller.com is where I provide adult supervision for leaders that can't get along. That's what I get paid best for doing. So let's talk about what we're here to do. So let's assess the impact the last few years. And first of all, we've gone through something similar to a global version of 9/11, a global mass disaster. And I worked with a clinical psychologist, Dr. Jernigan. Imagine, now we know that there's a psychological process populations go through a mass disaster. There are people still today that were in Manhattan during 9/11 that if you show them a building of the Twin Towers, it will trigger them. Trauma is real. We did a lot of research on trauma when we did our last education book and when we did the Healthy Workplace Nudge. I happen to have a daughter who has trauma, so that was part of the motivation. And we still do not know how this is all going to play out. Trauma rewires the brain. It's called a default mode network. It's called the ring of fire. If I showed you a brain scan of it, you would see 4 hot zones at the top of the brain. And what happens is the thinking gets stuck and you don't process. You don't separate your emotions, so you go back into that experience immediately. So imagine 2 years. I lost my mom, my mother-in-law, and my dad through it, and 2 dogs. Okay? There are things people are still working through. And there's a book, if you know anybody who has experienced anything like that, it's called The Body Keeps Score. Because what happens with trauma is it goes into the body. Unless you have a way of getting out of the body, it'll create different kinds of autoimmune issues. And I've got lots of stories about it. One of the trauma experts that we work with says the issues are in the tissues. Now, when you consider that the general population, about 4% of the population has PTSD. During the pandemic, it was up to 30%. Now, a lot of people are going to work through it. But we've got this hidden thing going on in the workplace that a layoff could trigger them, a weird election could trigger them. we're in this mode where we don't know where the triggers will be. There are periods like anniversary events. And there's a lot of people where if a parent died around Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving is a really miserable time and you can't get it out. We need to be designing with trauma-informed design as we go forward. And schools are really good. If you really want to understand, get to some of these social emotional literacy things in schools. This is the manual. Hold on here. This is the manual. If you want it, just let me know and we'll send it to you free. It's an 80-page manual on working through all of this stuff. Kodak moment. Now, when I grew up, Kodak moment was you stood in front of the castle in Disney and that's where you got your picture. How many know what the new meaning of the Kodak moment is? It means you're stupid. They invented digital photography in 1975. And because film was their cash cow, so they had an incentive not to pay attention to it, but it was lousy. It was 8K was the original resolution. And then by 1992, Casio had a consumer camera, and it was too late by 1992 because it's Moore's Law, right? Every 2 years, that resolution level is doubling in its resolution level at equal or less than the same cost. So now, this little camera here, it's better than my Nikon camera in terms of resolution. I still got my Nikon camera in film, and I grew up in the film world. I think we're at the Kodak moment. We've had an existential shift where all the rules are changed. It's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. We're still doing that. We still think it's about furniture. The other thing, too, is we got off the treadmill for 2 years. Hold on. How many are familiar with the Red Queen's race in Alice in Wonderland? In the book, now that's not the book, but in the book, there's a phrase that in our land, you have to run twice as hard just to stay even. How many felt that work was like that before the pandemic? Every year, we just had to run faster and faster, and we didn't realize that we were on this treadmill until the treadmill stopped. And then we all looked in the mirror, and then we sat down with our family for dinner and said, this is what I've been missing. And then we said, I'm not going back. I was on the road 3 weeks out of every month. I just didn't know there was anything different. But now we all do. And now companies want us to forget what we learned for 2 years and what we got used to for 2 years, and they want to flip the switch on and call us back. And we're saying, I don't think so. 50 million people resigned over the last 2 years. That's 1/3 of the workforce. Now, to replace people, the replacement cost of those 50 million is $1.9 trillion. Is this giving you a little picture of where we're at? And we're still fragile. Like, we're still recovering. Imagine any athlete, injured reserve for 2 years, right? Now they're coming back. And you say, you're going to play Sunday. They haven't worked out, they're not in condition. And that's what we've asked employees to do. We haven't rehabilitated or rehabituated ourselves into a new rhythm. The bottom line of all that is we come to this new equilibrium and we're still working through emotional issues, economic issues, but we see what's happening in commercial real estate, right? How many people are shedding space? Some of my companies, they've shed 30% of their corporate real estate and facilities groups. Now, there is a lag for all that to work out, and it's coming. I haven't heard anybody really talk about it, but I don't see anybody preparing for it. And we're still trying to push like it's normal, and it's not. It's just not. Socially, have you lived in a crazier time than this? I can say I did. In the 60s, we had a president assassinated, 2 great leaders assassinated. We were burning cities. We had students shot. But we had a soundtrack. That's what we did have. There's no soundtrack for this one. Yeah, the prophetic voices were in the music. There are no prophetic voices. There's just angry people who want to destroy stuff. So we're in that mode too. I just want to make sure we're all on the same planet together. We're going to see future disruptions and triggers in the workplace. So I'm going to tell 3 stories of leading through change. One of the stories is going to be the Google story in 2005. Another story is going to be the CBRE headquarters in 2014 in LA. And then the third one is going to be the GoDaddy tech headquarters, which was 2017. Great stories of leading through change because these leaders led through the unknown territory. How many have ever done wilderness camping or hiking? Okay. You want a guide, right? Most of the time. And you can't predict what's going to happen. How many remember who Lewis and Clark are? I have to. Okay. So what was the big thing they ran into? What did they think they were going to do? Yeah. And how are they going to get there? By rivers. Using what means of transportation? Canoes. And then what was the big surprise they ran into? Rocky Mountains. Oh, we didn't see that one coming. So I've got a colleague who wrote a book, Canoeing the Mountains, and it's about the kind of leadership you need when everything you planned and prepared for no longer fits the current situation. It's called adaptive leadership. Now, here's something I threw in new. I just have to throw this in. We've all seen this iceberg, right? Bosty came up with it in the 80s, and there's different variations of it. But the bottom line is that somewhere between 15 and 20% of our cost is in the thing side of it. Design and construction, about 5%. How many are in design? Okay, this will make you really happy. 0.5% of the cost is design. And yet, most owners want to squeeze. I like to say they like to squeeze the pennies and lose the dollars underneath. And then the human stuff is on the bottom. I was working with a company that was trying to put together the portfolio of services we'd need in a post-pandemic world. They gave me all these things. We need to reimagine space, right? We need to leverage technology. Now technology is just standard. We need data to know what we're doing and why. That's the new thing. So people are now interested in it. It was boring before, now it's cocktail talk, right? People love to hear about data and surveys. Real estate, we need to optimize real estate. It's a fancy word. We need to get rid of a lot of it. Turnkey, I'm seeing some dealers getting into turnkey, small level construction for agile, fast movement. Decommissioning, anybody doing decommissioning? Workplace strategy. Ergonomics. It's all tip of the iceberg. And I started saying, there's nothing human in that. So I made up my own list of what is work now. We've had the Kodak moment. We don't even know what work is. So we have to reimagine. That means new structures of organizations. Distributed organizations or distributed work is completely different than centralized work. It's not even the same thing, but we still have the same organizational structure, so we're not even working on redesigning those. What's the day in the life like for people today? Do we even know that? What's the employee experience like? We need surveys and data, right? Reducing the friction, I'll have more about that. Are we helping reduce the whole friction of work in general? Rebalancing the system. The system has reached a new equilibrium, and we'll talk about that. And so how do you change that equilibrium? Old culture, new culture. Whatever culture an organization thought they had before the pandemic, they don't have it anymore. It doesn't exist. Because culture are the invisible attitudes, habits, values, and behaviors that run a place when you're not there to run the place. In fact, I boil it down as culture is what happens when you're not there. That's all it is. But now we value things differently, right? All those invisible things. I value being home more. So we haven't recalibrated and asked, and this is part of what we call the shadow culture, and it's addressed in a couple of the books. But we haven't even helped companies figure out what part of the old culture still remains that we want to build on, and what's the new culture like. But you can't know that until you know what the new org structure is going to look like and the new way of work. We've got a lot of work to do, but we're still trying to sell furniture. We've got to rebuild trust. The basic covenant of work has been broken. I come, do a good job, you take care of me. It's not there. We have to help people get new habits and rituals. Habit design, ritual design. There's a narrative gap. Have you ever heard of the word narrative gap? One of the reasons organizations get stuck is they don't have what we call a from-to story. This is how we got here. This is where we're going and why. I'm working with an organization where all of the workplace strategy, construction people, the morale has dipped because of a narrative gap. They were in the business of creating great user experience. That's what they were there. Now, all they're doing is reacting to try to reduce space, and so their purpose is gone. And there's no story to help them bridge, this is how we got here, this is why we're here, this is where we're going, and here's why it's important. It's called narrative gap. And then paradigm shift. We're going through it. I would recommend you read the 1963 book called The History of Scientific Revolution by Thomas Kuhn. It's where the word paradigm first came. Okay? All right, so this was a bonus. I threw this in for fun. The new system. So here's what's happened. When you want to change a system, and look up the word system and look up the word wicked problems in Wikipedia. Because what happens is we've got all these interdependent elements that have competing priorities and agendas. That's why construction projects suck. 70% of them are late and over budget, and then you hate everybody at the end. Because it's a system built around distrust. As soon as the owner puts the bid out, you play one game. As soon as you win, you play another game. That's a different book. But if you want to change a system, you have two levers. More than two levers. I'm going to simplify it. So right now, we've got, it's stabilized at about 2 to 3 days I'm willing to come in. That's about it. I don't know why we keep tracking these numbers and saying, it's up a quarter of a day this week or that. It's 2 to 3 days. That's what we're willing to do. If you try to do more, they'll push back. Now, what we've been focusing on is the input side. How do we make all the tip of the iceberg stuff better? Or how do we threaten you? So I call those two choices, I'm going to cave in and give you what you want. That's West Coast. Or I'm going to crack down and say you have your butt in the seat by Monday or you're fired. That's the East Coast. It's a basic difference between the two. Crack down or cave in. Think of all the stuff we've been focusing on. That's the input side. If we want to change a system, we have to deal with the constraint side. Because there's this concept in systems dynamics, you can look it up, called limits to growth. We've hit the limit of what we can do by improving facilities, creating incentives, or threatening people. We've hit the limit. It's 2 to 3 days. It's not going to change. So now we have to work on the constraints. There's 5 major constraints. The first one is commute. We all know commute is the #1 reason people don't come in. I'm going to share a story about that. Distraction. I got to go to Starbucks because I can't get work done in the office. The average attention span of an adult now is 3 minutes. If you've got kids, it's 90 seconds. The average amount of focus time an executive gets per day is 15 minutes. That's it. It takes 15 minutes to begin to get into a focus mode, and it takes 45 minutes to 90 minutes to get deep work done. That's why people don't want to go in the office place, because it's a Cuisinart. My attention span gets shredded. Meaningless meetings. How many are doing back-to-back virtual meetings? All right, so here's some brain science. Your brain is the largest calorie consumer, 20 to 30%. In a virtual environment, it's up to 50%. So if you feel fried by 2 in the afternoon, that's why. You're toast. But we haven't adjusted, we haven't redesigned work for virtual environments. We're not taking anything about how the body works and how the brain works. What I'm saying is a lot of opportunity for design. Bad bosses. Freakonomics recently came out with a podcast that said, why are there so many bad bosses? Well, we can tell you why. And I won't get into all the reasons, but I'll tell you what the ratio is. 18% of people are wired to be naturally developmental coaching kind of bosses. 82% are what we call directive bosses. They can tell you what to do, they'll troubleshoot and hold you accountable. But that only works if they can see you. So they were adequate before the pandemic, they suck now. We do profiles, I know those bosses in the companies I've been coaching, the people who work for them in the virtual environment are suffering the most. That's something you can't do anything, but you need to know it's there. Stress. Harvard Medical, before the pandemic, said 75% of people said work is the #1 source for high or very high stress. And in the book called Healthy Workplace Nudge, we track that to the main unhealthy coping behaviors. What are the major unhealthy coping behaviors? Drinking, right? Eating, comfort food, specific kind of eating, right? Lifestyle, right? This group is good. Smoking, self-medicating, Netflix, binge watching, all those things. And guess what? We tied it to the #1 risk all companies have, and that's the rise of chronic disease. 60% of adults in the United States have one or more forms of chronic disease, rising at a 7% compounded rate. So it's really interesting that the root word for facility is to make easier. That's the Latin root. So let's talk about Google, okay? So Dave Radcliffe, who just retired from Google, I met with him so Google's got this bus program, right? And I want to give you the story of the bus program. So the backstory is in 2005, Google was only a 6-year-old company. They were growing rapidly. They were on the Sun Microsystem campus. So they were doing what we call hermit crabbing. They were just taking on buildings and repurposing those buildings. And so they were emerging out of this startup mentality, and they had a major problem. Housing was unaffordable. So people had to live a good bit away. They needed to continue to attract talent, long commutes. What David Radcliffe came up with is this bus concept. How many are familiar with the Google buses where you can get on a Google bus, and when you're on, you've got great Wi-Fi, food, you're logged in as being at work while you're there, and you can do what you want on the bus. You can sleep, you can do work, or do whatever. Incredible concept. The reason he was able to do that is he redefined his role. So this is one of the key things to write down, reframing what we do. We don't do design. We don't do facilities management. If you're a facility manager, what you really do is grief counseling. You get people through the 5 stages of grief. You've been here 5 years in this cubicle, now you're going to be over here, and I know you hate me, but we'll get through this. Dave Radcliffe said, our job is to reduce the friction of work. Now, he's the head of real estate, facilities, corporate services. How many people do you know define their role in those spaces as my job is to make work easier or reduce the friction? The friction point was commuting. He reframed the role. I don't need permission to go out and do buses. They're not buildings, but it's part of our job to reduce the friction of work. Now think of that as a metaphor, because we're not going to go to clients and say, hey, just buy buses. But there's other ways to do it. And that thinking led to some transformational things like micro kitchens and behavioral economics. How many are familiar with using behavioral economics in design? It's called nudges. So I want you to see this refrigerator here. See that frosted glass? What a nudge is, the brain, because of all the calories, remember the calories? Most of the time it's in default mode. If you've got teenagers, that's 100% of the time. But most of the time, unless it's survival or something you really want, it'll go the path of least resistance. That's what a nudge is. So the nudge is this. See this water and these juices, kombucha, the California drinks, they're behind the clear glass. But if you look underneath here, you'll see this fuzzy green and red and burgundy. All the bad stuff is there. They stepped outside of normal thinking about design and facilities to look at behavioral economics. And this is their crowning jewel right now. Bayview was just opened, and then Charleston East was opened, I think, last month. So they've gone from hermit crabbing to building their own world-class facilities. Another story. CBRE headquarters. Lou Horn was the president of the Southern California region, and they were coming out of the real estate crash. How many knew that CBRE lost 90% of its stock value during the crash? So coming out of it, Lou said, the art of the deal isn't going to get us in the future. We're not leveraging the collective knowledge in here. Everybody recognized that, and they had 5 different market segments in the office that didn't talk to each other, and then they had their support services that they didn't leverage, legal and accounting. And industrial, commercial, retail, institutional. And what he said is, we've got to leverage this collective knowledge, and we need to reduce silos. Okay? How many have heard we need to reduce silos? So everyone was on board until this statement, and this is part of this leading through change. You're going to lead through resistance, sabotage. When he said what that means is we're going to need to get rid of most of our private offices. That's when the broker said, over my dead body. And you can imagine, they had their 15 by 15 offices. They had their backstage passes with Eric Clapton at the last concert, framed. They had their silver shovels, their precious files, and their gatekeeper. And they were being asked to give that up for what? A new laptop. Oh, plus all the files that they had. And remember, these are brokers in their late 40s, 50s. This is back in 2012, they started talking about this. So this thing called the cloud was not what we know it today. When you lead through change, you raise anxiety, and you have to know how to do that and to a level so it doesn't shut down. And then you have to engage the group. So the big innovations here was Lou said, let's go see what's out there. And he engaged 25% of the office in 8 different areas of research, like amenities and sustainability and furniture and technology and all that. And they went to go see. One of my favorite futurist quotes is William Gibson, the future's already here, just not evenly distributed. So you go and see outliers. So they went and saw outliers. Lou was hoping to go from 70% of the office place as private offices down to 30%. That was his hope, his win. The group decided 1 private office for the CFO. And they were the first well-certified corporate space. They saved $9 million. Their footprint was 60% of the original. They had 40% more people coming in because of how great the space was. The thing that got me to go see it is when he said, we've had 15,000 visitors in 18 months. We've all seen great spaces, right? But the reason was not the space, it was the story. They had a story of transformation. Now, Lou took a risk. His boss, Al Ratner, said, Lou, if this doesn't work, that's a career decision. When you get out on a limb, this new kind of leadership requires that we're outside. We don't have anything to guide us. We don't have a precedent to go on. It's unknown territory. He was smart because he divided it up. They went to sea. They brought those ideas back. They prototyped them. And then they collectively came up with the decision that keeps you from getting killed if you're the only one doing it. Okay, the final story is GoDaddy, one of my favorite stories. That's Calvin Crowder, head of corporate real estate with GoDaddy. And we were going through the story. Calvin's been a good colleague for a long time. How many remember the old GoDaddy with Don Parsons and the race cars and very misogynistic culture, right? They were also very Spartan culture. No frills for the programmers. So they're in this industrial warehouse area. It's a small area. The security guard is Bubba. And you go in and out. There was nothing there. And they wanted to reduce turnover and turn it into a place, a destination place. Calvin cashed in some of his capital, his social capital, and said, I want to try something. Industrial park, dark, dank, low ceilings, utilitarian, high turnover, okay? No. They started with employee journey. What's the day in the life like? They looked at all the touch points along the way from the time you leave to the time you get in the parking lot to the time you go to the check-in, and they looked at and rated them all as either friction points, hassles, neutral, or engaging. And then they began to work on how do we change that. And one of the most friction points was checking in with a very impersonal guard. And this is what they came up with. It's not a low ceiling, and their reception people are trained. The second day I was there, they remembered me. And you go straight from there into the big open kitchen area. It's an incredible facility. But again, talking about the experience of it, they hired four-season trainers, and I was part of the training here, on how to deliver one-off experiences, hospitality experiences. Now, this is a third party called ISS. They paid them more, they gave them training, and they gave them decision-making discretion. One story, it was very touching. An individual was out in bereavement, and when they came back, the janitorial service person bought flowers, because they had budget to do that, left a nice note. They call them experience managers because their job is to make someone's day great. That's the whole job. And they're rated based on that. So turnover dropped, things were great. And that's what I'm talking about. Hospitality furniture without hospitality training and experience, it's just furniture. But it's transformational when it becomes human. And I'm going to show this picture here. Totally transformed the culture of the organization going through this process. A building can change you because you're going on this journey, a from to journey. We're going from Spartan, utilitarian, to you matter. It's part of the story. And here's how we're going to show it. Productivity went up, retention went up, and then there's Tommy. How many watched the movie Finding Nemo? How many remember Crush? Tommy is Crush. I was leading a leadership workshop. On the bottom right, in between Dean Stanberry with IFMA and Jamie Moore with DPR, is Tommy. Tommy photobombed us. And so I asked Tommy, I said, what's up today? He said, oh, it's my day off. I said, so why are you here? He said, dude, Why wouldn't you be here? This is awesome. It changed the whole culture. And we're now at a point where we really need to go back to those original things. What is the culture we've had? What is the new culture? How do we do this journey from to? How do we create environments? How do we find outliers that we can pull from? How do we pull it all together? And now we're going to wrap it up. All right, summary. Reframe what we do. What you think you do is not what you do. What do you do, but what do you really do? Have that exercise in your office. And a lot of times it's herding cats or doing this, but start thinking about what you really do that's magical. What's the magic that you bring? We want to go from being heroes to guides. That was what I learned with CBRE. Lou was not the expert. He admitted he wasn't the expert. He made many mistakes. But what he did is he galvanized the group, said, I don't know the answers, but we'll figure it out. He was the guide. Now, as experts, whether you're an architect, designer, facility manager, you like to come in as experts. That's the wrong role. Nobody wants a hero. Make them the hero. Make your client the hero. Figure out their heroic journey. What are they trying to overcome? Who's the villain getting in the way of their story? Because we all have a villain. Whether you're trying to lose weight, trying to get a relationship with your teenager, whatever it is, you're going through a journey. And we're there to help them realize the significance of the journey, what the journey is, and help empower them along the way with our magic powers, whether it's design or whatever it is. Stakeholders. This is a different way to design. It's messy to have stakeholders, but it's what we call generative design because they're the ones creating the memories, the experience, the knowledge, and it's a different way of facilitating. It's the way our company does it. We just do generative work. The day in the life scenarios. Outliers and pilots, and then remove the constraints. Discovery leadership. The future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. It's going to take courage, especially in a time when everyone's risk averse and people are easily triggered. Each leader in this group had a hunch about something that was deeply human that they were after. And I just heard a strategic foresight presentation talking all about data and stuff like that. When there's no precedent, there's no data. Nothing in the past can inform you about what the future's going to look like, just like Lewis and Clark. Nothing in their past informed them of what do we do if we hit the Rocky Mountains. That's the moment we're in. Now, I like data as much as the other person, but a lot of this is we just need a bunch of people who are in the same boat and want to go figure it out together. And we'll just compare notes a lot. All three of them put their careers online. They were all told, if this doesn't work, you're going to get a nice severance package, but you won't be here. All three of them. We have to overcome fear of messing up, FOMO. We can't get there alone. We can't. We just can't. You're not the expert. I'm not the expert. I really rely on the wisdom of the crowd. And the more diverse you can make the group, even people outside. Discovery leadership is the ability to draw people together who feel like we're in the same boat, we have the same challenges, and we're willing to face the unknown together. I like to say there's two stages to it. When you want to do something that's risky in the unknown, you got a lot of people who are interested. So I say you start with a collection of the curious, and then you weed it down to the cohort of the committed. I've led 6 or 7 of them with over 500 people. And I'll tell you, every single book we've done, we've started with certain assumptions. And about a third of the way in, we found that all the assumptions we had were wrong. Now what do we do? Like wellness. We assumed that we were here to support HR in making wellness programs more effective. How many feel that's our mission? We're not the wellness experts, but we're here to help it. And then what we discovered is wellness programs don't work. They fundamentally don't work. They can't work. And that was, now what do we do? It's a $4.7 trillion industry. And we're going to go out there and say, everything you're doing regarding wellness just doesn't work. It can't work. So now what do? That's the question. When you hit the Rocky Mountains, now what do you do? And what we did find, designing a healthy building is the best thing you can do, because 100% of people benefit from proper lighting, from good air, movement, 100% of people. And it's the least expensive improvement to affect 100% of people. We found behavioral economics works, nudges, change architecture. We found creating intuitive design reduces stress. So that forced us to look at what does work, because we assumed we were there to help guide our industry as to how do we support wellness programs. That's what happens when you get out on a limb and you start doing things that there's no precedent for. All right, so we've got 10 minutes for Q&A. So if we go back to Lou Horn's example, he had 25% of the office engaged, 8 different categories. And what they did is they had town hall meetings every Friday, and they had this big wall of everything they learned and the stuff that worked and didn't work. And they just had an open forum for anybody there. The employees were involved through proxy, but also had the opportunity of a town hall. The challenge that you face and others have faced is that they made all the decisions and they did it better. There was a new headquarters that moved from California to Texas, and they had done something similar. And great furniture, great layout, I loved it. But when the employees hit it, it was their first experience with it. So there was no emotional transition. And one of the biggest questions people have is, how am I going to be successful in this environment? Or I worked with Sally for 6 years and now I don't see Sally. Thinking through that kind of change issue with people. And for Lou Horn, the big breaker was taking all those files, digitizing them in the cloud, and then teaching the brokers how to access it in a computer. That was the highest anxiety thing for all of them. And you can imagine, when I used to have paper files, I'm the only one that knows where to find them in there. What they hired, though, to manage the anxiety, because competency is one of the anxieties. How am I going to be successful? They hired them all digital coaches to help them tag their files, learn how to use it. And one of the people who was a big detractor told me, I'm a better broker now. I can do my stuff at the beach where I couldn't before, because now I know how to get my files. So there's change management, and then there's adaptive leadership, and they're similar but different. And adaptive leadership focuses on the emotional journey of competency, my relationship networks. The purpose of Outliers is to be able to envision how we can be successful. So when CBRE went out to Google, they came back and said, we're not Google. But when they went out to Eneco in Amsterdam, they said, wow, now you're beginning to be able to see what it could be like. Then they went up to Russell 2000 in Seattle and saw really wealthy people with no offices. And now their imaginations are clicked in. They say, we know what it could look like. Now we need to contextualize it for us. One of the big problems is nobody can look at a 2D plan or even a fly-through and imagine what life is going to be like in it. So that's part of the challenge. And story is part of it too, crafting the story. Most companies don't take the time to do that, and they wait too long in the process. How do we begin to recondition and rehabituate people into the new patterns? And that's the challenge we've all thought. We're just going to flip the switch, give it to them, tell them what to do. That's not how habits and behaviors and attitudes work, and value too. It's complex, right? But it's a great question. Any more? Thank you very much.